introduce our first speaker today. It's early in the morning, but I hope you're ready for some music and composer talk. This is Greg Wall from Krakow, and nickname El Draconaret, official name as he is presented in the society. The first panel is titled How to Talk to a Composer. So let's start.
Okay, hi everyone. Are there many composers out here? Okay, only one, okay. So, what about me? As Maria told, I'm Greg, also using my pseudonym Draconaret. I've been composing music for video games and ads and short films. I worked in video game industry for 5 years, and currently I'm working on a video game soundtrack for Agony by Madmind Studios. And why am I talking about it? Many times when I'm hired, I usually don't have problems with what I deliver, but usually the feedback is binary. It's either okay or not okay. And when I want to discuss the pieces I wrote, I usually get a response like this. And usually in this situation, sometimes we can get angry because both sides can get into an agreement and both sides get angry, and when everybody is angry, then nothing gets done. And usually, game designers and directors ask themselves what to tell. And I was thinking about reasons for that, and maybe one of them is that music needs time to listen. And for example, if I show you, well, I don't have it one, but if I show you 2D art, then immediately you can tell if it's okay or not, what you would change. But if I play you an example right now, this is such a short fragment that you can't tell if it's okay or not, and it can develop even further. And even then, you have to re-listen to it again to give a proper feedback. So, if not time, maybe unfamiliarity. Because I think that music is artificial in many ways, because we are surrounded by people, by animals, by nature, by buildings, by cars, but we are not necessarily surrounded by music. Of course, we have elevator music in supermarkets, we have music on in our earphones, but this is not very normal. For example, if we wake up in the morning, we don't hear any morning music or something like that. Also, maybe the problem is with no proper education and training. Because many times when I talk to game designers or directors, they think in musical terms, and as they don't know many of them, they don't say anything, and they just trust their instinct. Also, in Poland, music education in primary and high schools, it is very on low level. It is more about listening to music, not understanding and thinking about it. Maybe it's my bad luck. I didn't met people who would like to talk about it. But 2 years ago, I met a guy who ordered some music from me, and he got really nice feedback. And it was only one guy in Polish video game industry that I met, and I discussed it a lot of times. Or maybe people don't care. Because one time I talked to a composer that he mentioned that people don't listen to music to think about it, just so it plays in the background. And I think that's probably right, for example, in mobile gaming, because usually people turn off the music after 5 minutes of playing, because it gets repetitive. But if people wouldn't care about music, how, for example, Witcher 3 soundtrack can be the best, one of the best music on Spotify these days? So there are a couple of ways to discuss about music, and I will try not to use any musical terms, anything connected to creating music and how composers do their magical stuff. And to answer the question, what should we tell to the composer? There are two ways I can think of, and one of them is using example tracks, and it is the most common I encounter. Usually when I get hired, game designers or game developers send me some reference tracks, so I can get what they are feeling. And it is very easy because you just listen to the track, you like it, and you pass it on. And also, it's a good reference for both sides because composer can get inspired by this. And when he delivers a piece, then the developer can rate the music he delivered by referencing that example track he sent. Another approach, by the way, there is also this quote I usually get when I get the example tracks. And it happens a lot of time. By the way, a question for you. Do you know what type or genre of music is usually sent as an example tracks? Anyone? Yeah, trailer tracks. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's in every trailer these days, and it's a big, huge sound that should work with everything. Yeah, it's easy to do because it's already there, and it's very simple, by the way. Another way, a harder way, is to use temp tracks, and it is from film industry. And it's abbreviation from temporary tracks. It works something like placeholders, but it's different than placeholders because placeholders can be random objects in the game. But temp tracks are not only placeholders, but also our inspiration for the composer. What should he work on? And it is harder because we need more time to prepare. And because we have to put it into the game, to cut it properly. And I'm curious, how many of you in your video games use temp tracks? Okay? Well, I thought that it is uncommon to use temp tracks. I encountered only a couple of times. In my experience, I experienced only one situation with temp tracks. And there is one little trap with using temp tracks, and example tracks, by the way. So let's get back to this sentence. Do you think there is something wrong in this sentence? Not grammatically. Yeah, but I would like to focus on this part, do something similar. And I want to focus on that because many times when I am given an example track, developers want me to do something very similar, like maybe even copy it. And it is closing ourselves to some new ideas, to some originality. And to show you some examples what it can lead to, there is a film. There's a video on YouTube called Marvel Symphonic Universe, and this fragment, in that video, the author makes a statement that music in Marvel films is not very original, and one of the reasons is by overusing temp tracks. And I don't want to discuss if he's right or not, but I want to show you what using the temp tracks might lead to. this is the temp track that was used. And the final version of music. And one of the most famous one. And now the final track in the movie. So as you can see, the music in both examples is very similar. Like there is the same tempo, the same mood, even the same notes, and the reasons for this might be different. For example, the composer didn't have much time to compose. Maybe he wanted to use familiar patterns that he is used to, or maybe the director is so used to the temp tracks that he wants the music to be the same way, like in the temp track. And I want to show you now another example when the temp track might be a good inspiration. But before that, I want to ask you a simple question. What comes to your mind when I say United States 20th century, beginning of the 20th century? What music comes to your mind? Okay, so in my situation, it is like maybe blues music, jazz, maybe ragtimes, classical music also. And in this particular case, we have something totally different. This fragment comes from a TV series called The Nick. It's about medical staff of a hospital Knickerbocker in New York at the beginning of the 20th century. And Steven Soderbergh the director of this TV series, wanted to mimic the filthy and brutal world of that time, but he didn't like the music of that time. So he thought of electronic music, and he asked Cliff Martinez to do some electronic music. And Cliff Martinez, who wrote the final music, was skeptical at first, but when he saw scenes with his music from older projects, he got convinced. So as you can see, there is some room for variation. There's something to create something new. And now I have some examples from my personal experience. When I was working with Polyslash on a survival horror game Fantaruk, we were at the time that we had to remove all the music that was created and to make something new. And then my friend, who is a lead designer there, told me that he liked music from a horror film, It Follows. By the way, great horror film. And I asked him what did he like in that music. And he said that he liked the brutal and harsh sound. And because he didn't give me any particular track as an example, then I had to choose, and this is one of the references. So we are still in the electronic music, and with having in mind what my friend said about this brutal and harsh sound, but also having this particular track in mind, we wanted to create something something maybe not similar, but we wanted to be inspired by this. And this is one of the tracks that made it to the... So as you could hear, maybe sound wasn't totally similar, but there's still the same mood, the same atmosphere, or the brutal and harsh world. And because my friend didn't give me any particular track, there are even more tracks that wouldn't work, and also in such situations, this is sometimes on the composer side to decide what track is the best. But it is also good to say which track is good, because sometimes we can get with something like that. It is also a fragment from It Follows soundtrack, and if I would be inspired by this track, then we would have a little conversation about how music should sound like. So, when you give an example track to the composer, you should first focus on what works for you. Is it the tempo? Is it the mood? Is it the use of sound? And when you choose an example track, focus on what fragment do you want to use, what fragment fits your game, because as I showed you, one fragment works good and other fragments didn't. And also use example tracks not as a perfect music for your game, because it is not perfect for you, because it was made for something else. And use it only as an inspiration, and be open to ideas, because composer might come up with something unique, maybe something original, just because he was inspired by the track you gave him. And now I want to move to something maybe harder, because when we got the piece of music, composer composed, and we want to say something more about the music we got, besides this binary feedback I told you before. And before that, I want to show you a fragment of a very famous film that you all know, but I don't know if many of you know this particular version. Okay, so this was a parody, Star Wars without Williams. And I showed you this because I want you to feel like a director right now. And you prepared this scene, it is final cut, and you want to give it to the composer. And I want to ask you, what do you want the viewer to feel? Anyone want to try? Okay, so when I see this scene, I feel some kind of joy, it's celebration, and because it's the end of the movie, it should sound really big. And if you went to the composer, in this case was John Williams, you wouldn't say to him, I'm no expert, you should know better what to do. But instead, you would say to him, we want something very happy and something like celebrating, because this is at the end of the movie. And that's why another way to talk to a composer is by emotions and feelings. And because when we make video games, we want the players to feel in a certain mood. Like when we play when we play racing game, we want the player, when the player plays a racing game, he should feel excited, he should feel that the adrenaline is pumping up his veins, And when the player plays horror game, he should feel fear, he should be scared, and that's why we want him to feel that way. So one of the ways is by using music for that. And emotions and feelings can be very simple, like dividing it to joy, anger, sadness. But it's also just scratching the surface, because there are millions of colors and shades of these emotions and feelings. For example, we can take anger, and anger can be like, for example, anger can be hidden, like waiting for revenge and plotting against somebody. But also, anger can be full of curiosity, can be mad. On the other hand, we can take love, and love can be cold, like in an old marriage. But also love can be like starting to bloom, like it's hidden but waiting for something to develop. And also we can use keywords, and it's a group of emotions and feelings, because sometimes we can just discuss by adjectives, and it is useful to set keywords because sometimes we can use also, words like funeral, we can use maybe a celebration, and both sides should know what we are talking about. So the earlier we set these keywords, the better results we can get later. And for example, one of my tracks, when I was hired by a friend to make a music for a game when you control a digging machine that collects minerals, and I didn't get an example track. My friends all told me that he wants to make the player feel like maybe he's discovering something, and he feels that he's exploring the unknown. And also because it is a very happy game, and there's a lot of motion because of this machine, we came up with something like that. So you could hear that, well, it worked for a developer, and I think that there is some motion that is making the player feel that he wants to explore the unknown, to dig inside the earth. But also there is, with emotions and feeling, there's also one little trap, because there is a word emotional. And sometimes we use emotional for like very, like in moments where there are a lot of emotions. And it doesn't specify which emotions we want. For example, when we are angry, we can be also sad, but also regretful. And when we are in love, it can be cold, like maybe also a little sad. So a suggestion for you: don't use the word emotional, or at least try to use some other words that would say something about emotional. And now I want to try a little exercise with you. I don't know if it would work, because I prepared 2 fragments of music, and I want you to think what you listened to, what you hear, and I will ask you after the piece, what are your thoughts? What do you feel about this music? So let's start with this one. Okay, so what do you feel? Yeah, but something else. Like when you watch Star Trek, what do you feel? Op- yeah, discovery. Yeah, exactly. So as you could hear, there is excitement, there is victory, some discovery, and now another example. A little bit harder. Who wants to try? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's a very peaceful piece, so we are calm. I don't know if it was heard, but there is something in the background, like a little low note that was making a little bit anxious. So, um, yeah, yeah. And okay, so a little summary for the end. When you give an example track for a composer, or you want to say something about the music, focus on what do you want to achieve, because if the composer doesn't know what he should do, we can get to wrong place with the music. Also, when you give an example or talk about emotions and feelings, be open to ideas, because as I said earlier, a composer can come up with something different, maybe something more original than we would thought. Because as we said, a lot of game developers send trailer music, and sometimes trailer music might not work in our game, and something smaller might be better. And don't say you are no expert, because I think that composers for media are tools in your hands, and if you don't use the tool properly, then you can get wrong results. And I think that as a composer, I think that I'm filling up your ideas. I'm making your dream to come true. And if you can't lead me, then I can. Well, there is some small space where I get to the right point, but it's risky a lot. And that's all I have to say. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, ask them now or ask me later. So thank you.
So, do you have any questions for Greg? Okay, please wait. I want everyone to hear the question.
Okay, so I have a question. This is a general question about asking a composer to compose a piece. Do you believe it's possible, like for example, recently there was a game called Persona 5, I don't know if you heard it. There's a piece played almost constantly in the background, and it loops all the time. The game takes many hours to go through. Is it possible for a composer, how easy it is for a composer to create such a piece so it doesn't get really boring after like 1 hour or half an hour of hearing? I mean, I'm asking,
Yeah.
should we, when we design games, should we consider to like, okay, I have to structure my game in a way that I know that there will be some parts of the game and I put some different pieces there so it doesn't feel so boring, or we can go with that one piece and it would work okay?
So if I understood correctly, there's only one piece that is going on for hours.
There are different pieces, but there is one that plays almost all the time between some shorter fragments of battles. Let's
You know
call it.
what? There is. I think this is very hard question to answer because this is different, and somebody can, for example, in Skyrim, the music is very catchy. You can listen to it for a couple of minutes, but after several repetitions, it gets repetitive. But also, for example, in Dragon Age Inquisition, ambient music is very in the background, and you can't get it doesn't get in your head. So it's up to the developer if he wants to or she wants to create more tracks that are not repetitive, that are in different situations, in different moments of game. Then it should be on designer's note. Well, composer can give some notes that something might work here, something might work there, but well, yeah, it's mostly on the director side, because if you give only if you order only a piece of music that is, like, for example, is repetitive, then there is no much room to variation. Well, composer also can create some fragments that, for example, he can layer the piece, and the developer might play different layers, so it doesn't get very repetitive. Yeah, but as I said earlier, it's mostly on the director, designer side.
Is it possible, for example, for the designer to create some pieces that can be then looped in some random order, or you do not propose it even? It might not work.
Well, as I said earlier, we can use temp tracks to put in the game, and it's also a reference for a composer, what might work, what might not. But also composer can give ideas. Maybe sometimes in several situations, no music would work. For example, as I said, in Dragon Age Inquisition, the music is very in the background, but also there are moments when no music is playing, and it works. For me, it works great. I don't know if it answers your question.
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
Any more questions? Okay.
What would you say is the optimal way to transition between moods? Because, like, in movies, very static medium, you know at which minute the mood is going to change, but in games, you don't know when or what decision the player is going to make.
Can you repeat the question?
What would you say is the optimal way to transition between moods or between pieces of music?
Yeah. So you say that when we want to go from one piece to another.
Yeah.
I think that there should be some room for changing the music. For example, when you enter the city from landscapes, there should be some space for one track to fade out, and then some, for example, 1 minute or 2 minutes for another track to enter. But in a situation when we go from one track that is ambient-like to more action-like, there should be some cross-fading. So the ambient track is fading out, and at the same time, the action music is fading in. And for example, after the battle, the action music should fade out, or maybe the composer, if there is a cutscene or something like that, the composer might prepare a track that is ending the piece, for example, with a huge hit. So I think if we don't have such situation when we have cutscenes or specific moments, then I think cross-fading and fading out and fading in is a proper way.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone? Someone want to ask a question? So I think there's no more questions for you, Greg. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot.
Can I ask you for an applause one more time? Thank you. Thanks. very much. Congratulations.